Well, for the second time in the UFC's history, the Octagon is back in beautiful Tampa Bay, Florida. Tomorrow night, it's UFC on Fox 19, and this is the MMAfighting.com UFC on Fox 19 preview show. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ariel Helwani, alongside a preview show newbie, a rookie, if you will. Our very own Danny Segura is joining us here to talk about the show headline, of course, by Glover Teixeira versus Rashad Evans. A lot of changes along the way to get to tomorrow night's card, which takes place at the Amalie Arena, home of the Tampa Bay Lightning. We will get to that in a second, but first, let me introduce young Danny, who, by the way, is making not only his MMAfighting.com preview show debut, this is the first time that he is credentialed for a UFC event for MMAfighting.com. How about that? Welcome, my friend.
Thank you.
So what's it like? First time part of the MMAfighting.com team, credentialed for a UFC event. What's the experience been like so far?
It's been great. I love working for MMAfighting.com and just having the opportunity to come here. It's been great.
Great. So his $10 check is in the mail for that very nice endorsement. We appreciate that very much. So, as I said, a lot of changes to this card. Originally, it was supposed to be Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Tony Ferguson as the main event. Also, the co-main event, which a lot of people have forgotten, was supposed to be Rashad Evans versus Shogun Rua. And, of course, Dan Henderson versus Lyoto Machida was supposed to take place on this card. That is not happening anymore because Lyoto Machida failed his pre-fight drug test. We will get to that as well. What did you think, Danny, though, of the card when it was originally announced, and what do you think of it now?
I think the card was pretty decent. Obviously, it took some hits, but I felt like it gained as well, as you said, with the matchup between Rashad Evans and Glover Teixeira. I think that's a better matchup than with the Shogun Rua fight.
So the news that Lyoto Machida has to pull out of this card on, 3 days' notice for Dan Henderson. They can't get a replacement. That's understandable. Now we find out that Dan Henderson is going to fight Hector Lombard at UFC 199. This caught a lot of people by surprise, perhaps everyone not named Gegard Mousasi, who seemed to call this a couple of months ago when we spoke to him in London. But pretty shocking stuff for a guy who we thought was, playing it safe, and there's a lot of controversy as to whether or not he was cheating or not. Look, at the end of the day, he came out and said it himself. He told USADA that he was taking a supplement that was on the banned substance list. What do you make of the whole situation? Do you give him credit for coming out and saying, look, I was taking this, I didn't know? Or do you feel like, it's banned, and, he has to pay the price regardless?
Yeah, I mean, it's banned, and it's on the list. So as a fighter, his responsibility, or at least his camp's, is to look at the list and see if he's taking any of those supplements and stay away from those supplements. So, yeah, it is his fault for, failing for that supplement.
Does this change the way you look at Lyoto and his legacy and his UFC career at all?
I don't think so. I looked up the supplement. I think it's called 7 Keto, if I'm not mistaken, and it's a dietary supplement. It's not like, it doesn't seem like anything hardcore. You can buy it on Amazon. It's perfectly legal here in the U.S. It is banned, though, so I guess in a way it does hurt his legacy, but I don't think a whole lot.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of confusion from the fighters as to what they can or cannot take, and perhaps there's a debate whether you should take anything. If I were a fighter, and maybe this is too simple, if you're taking anything from a Flintstone vitamin to whatever, just clear it with USADA. And I know USADA typically says don't take anything. I think that's not really realistic. But why wouldn't you just go clear or look it up? You know what I mean? It feels like a lot of people aren't doing their due diligence, and that's where I think the problem lies.
Yeah, for sure. That's something they definitely need to do. Make sure, it's almost like common sense, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't want to lose on a fight. Obviously, that's a paycheck, and if you win, that's a step up in your division. But it seems pretty obvious that they should be clearing that up with USADA and letting them know what supplements they're taking. So yeah, I guess that falls on them.
Not sure how you feel or felt about the fight. I wasn't really into the fight to begin with. I'm upset for Dan, who was very honest with us. He's not getting paid, it seems, or not getting paid all that much, not getting his Reebok money, all that. But it wasn't exactly a rematch that I was longing for. Their first fight at UFC 157, I believe it was, the Carmouche-Rousey card, wasn't that exciting. It was one of those rematches that I did not see coming, and I'm not that upset that we're not getting to see it again. Do you get what I'm saying? Yeah. Do you agree?
Yeah, 100%. Obviously, watching that fight, it was kind of boring. You got to call it, how it is. It was just pretty much Dan Henderson stalking down Machida, and Machida had his moments, and that's why he eventually won the fight. But yeah, this rematch didn't really make a whole lot of sense. I think Hector Lombard versus Dan Henderson, I think that's a great matchup. So I think, yeah, that makes more sense than the Machida fight.
So I was actually just going to ask you about that. That's taking place June 4th in LA now. You like that fight?
Yeah.
Because that's been met with some mixed reaction. I believe our own Sean Al-Shadi said on Twitter the fight made him uneasy. But you like it. Why?
I like it because I don't feel like Dan Henderson at this point, he's going to make a run for the title. I feel like, and he still wants to fight. So I feel like he should just do fun fights, and I feel like this is a fun fight. The Machida fight is not a fun fight. Yes. It's a fight that Machida's going to do what Machida does and play his style, and, Dan Henderson doesn't have perhaps like the best footwork. So, chasing down Machida probably wouldn't be, fun for the fans. But with Hector Lombard, Hector Lombard moves forward, throws bombs. Dan Henderson moves forward, throws bombs. So I feel like that's a good fight.
At the top of this little preview show, I said that this was the 19th UFC on Fox event, which is amazing to me because the first one, when it was headlined by Kane versus JDS, feels like it was just yesterday. It's amazing that we're on the 19th. I'm just curious, from your perspective, how do you feel about the UFC on Fox events? Do they feel special like they did back then? Do they kind of feel like just another FS1 card to you? Now you see, on Fight Pass, just came out today, on July 7th, RDA is going to fight Eddie Alvarez for the lightweight title, and that's on Fight Pass. So what do you think of how the Fox events have evolved?
Well, I think they've gone down. You've mentioned it yourself. The first event was Cain Velasquez versus JDS, and that's obviously for a title. And I can't really remember the last time I saw a title fight for UFC on Fox. Probably Demetrius Johnson, right?
No, it was back in December. Donald Cerrone versus
right.
RDA. But they have been few and far between. Yeah. Prior to that, TJ and Burrell. I do think that you can make the case in 2016, the two Fox events. First one was headlined by Ryan Bader versus Rumble Johnson, and now this one, of course, is headlined by Glover versus Rashad. There have been better Fight Pass and FS1 cards, let alone pay-per-view cards, than the two Fox events. Would you agree with that?
I would agree. But also, you gotta get in the UFC's shoes for a second. I mean, this fight card originally wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
But it did take some hits for the hardcore and for the casual fans, and now we have this card. But originally it wasn't that bad.
So you said that you liked Glover Teixeira versus Rashad better than the original plan of Rashad versus Shogun. Very rare that the new fight is actually better than the original. I agree with you on that front. Rashad did not look very good in his last fight. Long layoff, comes back in October against Ryan Bader, and just didn't seem like his old self. Do you feel like there is more pressure on his shoulders going into this fight to turn back the clock, if you will, than Glover, who's had a title shot relatively, recently on a 2-fight winning streak, but doesn't have quite the resume that Rashad has had in the UFC?
Yeah, definitely the pressure lies on Rashad. A lot of people on Twitter and social media are saying he's washed up, he's past his prime, and obviously his performance against Ryan Bader didn't help that cause. So he does need to prove out there that, he is a top guy. And Glover Teixeira is a tough test. The guy's on a 2-fight winning streak, and, he's been looking good. The guys he fought are solid. So, yeah, it's definitely puts a lot of pressure on Rashad.
Do you think Rashad's best days are behind him?
It's tough to tell. I feel like we will find out in this fight because the Ryan Bader, as you mentioned, he was coming off a layoff, and ring rust is real. At least I'd like to believe.
Don't say that to Dominic Cruz.
Yeah, that's true. Well, for some fighters, it's definitely the case. I think it was for Rashad. He didn't look like himself. We've seen Rashad have better fights. So yeah, I think this fight will tell.
The interesting thing about 205 is it's such a shallow division, arguably the most shallow, maybe that and maybe 125. So even though Rashad is coming off a very bad performance, he wins this fight. I feel like he's right in the mix all of a sudden, right? Would you agree?
Yeah. This kind of reminds me when Tito Ortiz beat Ryan Bader, and then he was in against Rashad, and it's like people already were talking, would he get the next shot, even though he was on a pretty bad losing streak before that. Obviously, Rashad is not on a bad losing streak. But, yeah, if he beats Glover, as I said, Glover has beaten two top guys, OSP, who's actually fighting for the title, Patrick Cummings, and, if he beats Glover, I mean, he's up there. So he might be like a fight away or two for him a title, yeah.
I mean, he was even in discussion to fight John Jones next week for the interim title. Probably for the best that they didn't move things around, because they would have been left with no main event on this card. So who are you favoring? When you look into your Segura crystal ball, who are you favoring in this matchup?
I think Glover Teixeira.
Okay.
He's,
That all being said, you're going with Glover.
Yeah, I think, his past 2 performances, he's beaten some solid guys. Rashad, again, it's hard to tell because the Ryan Bader performance kind of, puts doubts in everybody's mind. And, he's still Rashad Evans. He's still a talented guy. But I guess you're only as good as your last fight. So I would have to go with Glover.
Do you think he finishes him?
Who knows? I don't think so. I think Rashad is a pretty smart fighter when he gets, hit. And he does have some wrestling, and, he does have grappling and clinching. So, he can avoid perhaps getting finished. So, yeah, I think it'll be a decision.
All right, let's move along now to what I believe is the people's main event, the now new co-main event, Rose Namajunas versus Teixeira Torres 2. They fought way back when in Invicta. Tisha handed Rose her very first pro loss when she was just 2-1 back then after that fight. They've both come a long way. You can make the case that Rose has looked a lot more impressive in the UFC despite the title loss to Carla Esparza. Tisha has had, fine performances, but she hasn't really necessarily wowed the crowd, if you will. I think that title implication-wise, division-wise, this might be the most important fight on the card. You could very well make the case that the winner of this fight is the #1 contender at 115. Do you agree?
Yes, 100%, especially if Rose wins, because she has so much momentum from the Paige Van Sant win. So you can make easily a title fight because, it seems everybody has been hyping up and really getting behind Rose Namajunas. So I feel like if she does have a good performance against Teixeira Torres, she could fight for the title next.
Do you think Rose, as I just said, has improved more and has become a better fighter since their first fight in Invicta, as opposed to Tisha, who I feel like has somewhat plateaued a little bit, hasn't necessarily realized the potential that a lot of people thought that she, the kind of fighter that they thought she would become?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think Rose has improved a lot. I recently watched their first fight, and she did a lot of, even though she performed well, she did a lot of things that you would question her fighting IQ. I feel like she's very smart now. Her striking has improved a lot more. We saw in the Paige Van Sant, she had great footwork and was moving very well. And in their first fight with Tisha, the movement wasn't really there. So yeah, I do think she's improved a lot. Plus, she got so much momentum coming from that fight.
Yeah, and we just came back from the weigh-ins. Both of them got huge reactions from the crowd. Tisha, of course, training out of Florida, so that makes a lot of sense. But Rose as well has become one of the bigger names in female MMA and, just in the UFC in general. Would you agree? I thought that fight as a whole got the biggest reaction of any on the card.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think both, like the women's fights got the most reaction. Even Beth Correa and Pennington, they had a pretty good pop when they came out. But yeah, definitely Teixeira Torres and Rose had a good pop as well.
So who are you favoring in this rematch?
I think I'm going to have to go with Rose. I agree with you. I feel like Teixeira Torres has sort of plateaued, and she really hasn't wowed the crowd, as you said. And Rose has so much momentum from her fight with Paige Van Sant, and she looked her performance looked really good. And I feel like she can take this fight and perhaps win a decision here.
She does sort of feel like a woman on a mission these days, especially coming off that amazing performance over Paige in December. Okay, now let's move along to Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Darrell Horcher, the relatively unknown Darrell Horcher. 8 days ago, Darrell Horcher wasn't even in the UFC. He was the CFFC lightweight champion. He takes this fight on very short notice, weighs around 180 pounds when he gets the call. It becomes a 160-pound catchweight fight. Almost missed weight, but in the end, an hour after the weigh-ins, he made it 161. So kudos to him. Did not look very good on the scales, though, right?
Yeah, he looked drained. His face just didn't really look there, and he definitely didn't look content. So when they announced he was over, everybody in the media was just talking about how bad he looked, and everybody was wondering how is he gonna cut that extra pound, but he did.
Yeah, kudos to him. Hopefully he didn't have to exert himself too much. I mean, you'd expect that. He told me yesterday he weighed around 172, so he's had to cut around 11 pounds in the last 24 hours or so. You kind of feel, I don't know about you, but I feel a little uneasy about the whole thing. I mean, just seeing how he looked up there and then he had the extra hour to cut weight, it does feel a little bit strange, doesn't it?
It does, and it's not like he's just fighting, anyone. He's fighting probably the best lightweight on the planet. We still got to find out when when he gets the belt. But yeah, so not only is he having a tough weight cut, but he's gonna go against a guy that's a killer.
How do you feel about this fight in general? It was met, again, with some criticism because people were expecting Khabib to fight a big-name opponent after Ferguson fell through, and Horcher steps up and he makes weight. How do you feel? Do you like that the UFC put together this fight, or do you think it's too big of a mismatch?
No, I like it. I feel like this was the best possible option out of the circumstance. Horcher gets a UFC contract, gets on the spotlight, so it's a win-win here. Because if he loses to Khabib Nurmagomedov, it's not that big of a deal. Obviously, he's a top guy, and he still has a UFC contract. And if he wins, he's up there.
Amazing. Yesterday, we asked him, okay, what do you expect if you beat Khabib? And he was saying, oh, maybe someone in the top 15. And kind of funny to hear someone say, beating Khabib gets you a top 15 fight. Typically, that would probably get you a title shot. But he is realistic of where he stands in the UFC. It was also interesting to hear him say that he's never done any kind of open workout in his entire career. This is all very new to him, and he's making his debut on Fox in front of at least a couple million people. Do you think he could pull this off, or is this too tough of a test for him?
Yeah, I think it's tough. I mean, obviously he's fighting a great fighter. Plus the weight cut, I don't think that helped at all. I wish they would have made maybe a 165 catch weight. Yeah. 160 was that weight cut was brutal, and we can tell by the weigh-ins.
What are you expecting out of Khabib? 2-year layoff.
I think he's going to look good. I feel like Khabib is, he looks like a hard worker. In his fights, we've seen it. He works all throughout his fight. So I don't think the layoff will really take a toll on him. Plus, he's been preparing for a 5-round fight, and now it's a 3-round fight. And I talked to Javier Mendez at the open workouts, and he said, yeah, we were prepared for a 5-round fight, and now it's just going to be 3 really hard rounds.
It did sort of feel like at the workouts, like he's a man on a mission. Didn't want to talk about Ferguson anymore. Was kind of annoyed by some of his comments earlier in the week, and actually, to me, looked to be in phenomenal shape. He's been working with Daniel Leaf, who's helped the guys at AK like Luke Rockhold and Daniel Cormier cut weight. Also works with the great George Lockhart. So he just seemed to be in phenomenal shape and very focused on proving that he's the best lightweight in the world. So you're picking Khabib. Does he finish Horcher, or does it go the distance?
Generally, I would pick decision for Khabib for obvious reasons. But Horcher, taking this fight on short notice, he didn't have probably a proper training camp. I don't know if you can have a proper training camp in that short amount of time. Plus the weight cut, I feel like Khabib can easily get a TKO here.
All right. One more fight on the main card. Want to get your prediction. Cub Swanson returning to action. It has been a while since we've seen him against Hakran Diaz. Who are you picking?
I think this fight will be on the feet. I think Hakran is a bit too stiff. And Swanson's completely the opposite of that. He moves a lot and he's very fluid. I think Cub Swanson takes this fight.
All right. And by the way, I mean, there are some interesting names on the undercard. You mentioned Pennington and Betch Kohea. We haven't seen her since UFC 190. She put on a show at the weigh-ins, by the way. I do suggest you check out her performance, or maybe you're looking at it right now as we roll the B-roll. But any other names, any other fights you want to spotlight before we say goodbye?
Definitely. I think Dariush versus Chiesa, I feel like that's a big fight.
Couldn't agree more.
Both guys are top 15, so the winner of that is up there and should be getting at least a top 10 guy, I would assume. Also, John Dodson, his return to the bantamweight division, I think it's interesting. He has a win over TJ Dillashaw, so a win over Manny Gambirian can maybe set up that fight.
Yep.
I think those 2 fights, Manny Gambirian and John Dodson, and Michael Chiesa versus Dariush should be good.
Could not agree more. I would like to give a shout out to Court McGee, who tomorrow, he fights April 16th, will be the 10-year anniversary of his sobriety. 10 years ago, he became sober on April 16th, 2006, and here he is fighting 10 years later, and a huge inspiration to a lot of people. If you didn't hear his interview this past Monday on the MMA Hour, just amazing stuff. What a guy Court McGee is, so want to give him a shout out as well. Great job, my friend.
Thank you.
Muchos gracias, as they say, right?
Yeah.
Yes, you did fantastic. The bar has been set very high for all the rookies from here on out. Danny Segura hitting a home run here on his debut for the MMAfighting.com preview show. Appreciate it very much. It's been a lot of fun covering with you, and we look forward to your coverage tomorrow. We will be there at the Amalie Arena in Tampa Bay. It's UFC on Fox 19. Glover Teixeira versus Rashad Evans. Rose Namajunas versus Tisha Torres. Thank you for watching our coverage up until this point. We'll be back Saturday night to wrap it up and, of course, give you more great coverage from the Amalie Arena. For now, we say goodbye. We'll see you on Saturday night.